If, like many persons doing photography and astrophotography, you are using a 4K monitor, then your viewing resolution is 8.3 megapixels. It doesn't matter if you have a 2 megapixel camera, a 10 megapixel camera, or 100 megapixel camera, your viewing resolution is 8.3 megapixels. The math behind this is simple. A typical 4K monitor with a 16:9 aspect ratio has 3,840 horizontal pixels and 2,160 vertical pixels, making a total pixel count of 8,294,400, or in simpler terminology, 8.3 megapixels. This means that no matter how many megapixels the camera that you're using has, whether for regular photography or astrophotography, you are viewing them at 8.3 megapixels. I've pointed out in the past that many of my earlier Astro images were shot with a Player One Uranus C camera, which has only 8.3 megapixels, and with modern camera sensors boasting 30, 40, 50, even 100 megapixels, that might sound like the resolution should not show up so well. But an Astro camera with only 8.3 megapixels of resolution does in fact show up perfectly on a 4K monitor because its resolution matches the monitor's resolution perfectly. This reality provides some important clues, both in regard to camera company marketing practices, as well as what we should consider when choosing to buy Astro cameras. For ages, camera makers have been marketing cameras with higher megapixels. It's become something of a gimmick. Here's this year's new model of camera, and it has a sensor with this many more megapixels than last year's camera. And by and large, that is a gimmick. The mistake persons new to photography tend to make is they think the more megapixels, the sharper the image. But the gimmick is this. Human eyes have a very wide field of view, typically around 200 to 220 degrees. Our vision is not digital, so the concept of megapixels doesn't exactly apply to our vision. Still, if we attempt to apply the concept of megapixels to human vision, it can be safely said that our vision falls into the range of about 576 megapixels, but that is for our entire field of view. However, our minds and our eyes concentrate vision toward the front of us, and we have this very narrow area right in the center of our vision known as the foveal area. It's about 5 degrees across, and it's where we see the most detail and where our attention focuses. And that's the part that really matters when we are considering the quality of what we are looking at. And the area of foveal vision is only considered to be to a resolution of 7 to 9 megapixels, which is why 4K works so well for human eyes. 4K just about parallels the resolution of our own vision. So the point is, adding more megapixels to a sensor isn't going to allow our eyes to see more detail, but it has other advantages. Let's take a look at them. More megapixels allows for oversampling. This is especially important with color cameras. Color cameras actually have monochrome sensors. They are capable of producing color images because the sensors are covered with a bare layer. This bare layer covers 25% of the pixels on the sensor in red, 25% of the pixels with blue, and 50% of the pixels with green. The differences in information are combined in the camera to produce a color image. This also means that any given pixel will only capture all the information in the color that it captures and will miss some of the information in the colors that it doesn't capture. For example, red pixels will not capture all the information that can be found in the green and the blue ranges. So the camera's built-in software interpolates what it believes should be there. In other words, the software makes an educated guess when it produces a final image. This guess is usually pretty good, but the lower the megapixels, the less sample points there are upon which to base the guess. This means that lower megapixel color cameras will produce softer images than higher megapixel color cameras. This happens because if the megapixel count is higher, there are more pixels per any given area. So, the guesses that are made in the process of interpolation have more samples to work from with higher megapixel sensors. So, higher megapixel sensors will produce more accurate and therefore sharper final color images. Likewise, when an image is shot with a high megapixel color camera, such as the Fuji X-T3, which has a 26.1 megapixel sensor, and then displayed on a 4K monitor where it must be downsampled to 8.3 megapixels, each monitor pixel is determining how to present itself based on multiple surrounding pixels from the 26.1 megapixel sensor. So each pixel on the monitor is drawing information from multiple pixels from the camera's original sensor, and presents itself in a way that best combines all that information. Here, the graphics card is doing the downsampling, And higher megapixel sensors provide more samples for the graphics card to work with, leading to sharper downsampled images. Also, higher megapixel sensors allow more freedom for cropping and framing. For example, if I were to go into the forest with my Fuji X-T3 and photograph an owl, I could crop in by as much as 2/3 and still keep the pixel count at about 8.3 megapixels. So the image of that owl would still appear at full resolution on a 4K computer monitor. Finally, downsampling also works as a noise management strategy. Noise, particularly from high ISO settings, tends to appear as a randomized grain scattered here and there among various pixels. Downsampling blends those pixels with neighboring pixels, averaging out their appearance and thus suppressing a great deal of the appearance of that noise. It doesn't really get rid of the noise, it averages it into the picture, so it's like it smooths out the noise within the picture. Nevertheless, it serves as a noise management strategy. But those advantages apply mostly to regular photography. In regular photography, photographers are shooting images in the light-rich conditions here on Earth. We astrophotographers, on the other hand, especially those who are shooting deep sky and deep field, are working in extremely light-poor conditions, and these are conditions that make us have to carefully reconsider our approach to megapixels on a camera sensor. You can think of the pixels on a camera sensor as cups used to capture light. Light comes to us in the form of waves that collapse into photons when sampled. I know that's weird, that's the odd way that quantum physics work though. Waves transform into particles when observed or sampled. In point of fact, the photons interact with the silicon of a camera sensor and are converted into electrons. The value of this electrical energy is stored in each pixel, and every new photon adds to each individual pixel's electrical value. If the pixel, or cup, is empty, its value is 0 and the pixel appears as true black. If the pixel, or cup, is full, it appears as full bright. If the pixel is half full of electrons, it appears as halfway between white and black, middle gray. And in the course of shooting an image, each pixel will gather as many photons as fall into it. Thus, each pixel has its own brightness value. Detail appears as the difference between one pixel's brightness and another's. But in a very real sense, you could think of pixels as like putting those cups in the rain. A wide cup is going to have more rain fall into it than a narrow cup. Applied to a camera sensor, this means that sensors with large pixels will capture more photons than sensors with small pixels. For ordinary photographers shooting subjects in the light-rich conditions of Earth, this hardly matters. At least unless they're attempting to operate in dark conditions such as in caves, deep underwater, or shooting at night. But for deep sky astrophotographers, this is of the utmost importance. We generally want the pixels on our camera sensors to be as broad as they can be. That way, in the light-starved conditions of deep sky astrophotography, each pixel can gather as much light as possible. So, since a 4K monitor can only display 8.3 megapixels, it would seem to make perfect sense that sensors be built to fill a telescope's field of view with 8.3 megapixels. That way, the camera sensor's pixels can be as large as possible, while capturing sufficient resolution to make a nicely sharp 4K image. And indeed, there are some 8.3 megapixel sensors, such as the Sony IMX585, which is found on a number of Astro cameras such as the ZWO ASI 585 and the Player One Uranus C. I have the Player One Uranus C, the uncooled planetary version, and I've used it to take some nice images of DSOs. While I'm pretty happy with how these images came out, the reality, however, is that the camera sensor did not nearly fill the telescope's field of view. The Williams Optics 81mm telescope can easily accommodate even a full-frame camera sensor. But the reality is the 585 sensor is quite small. It only fills about 20% of the Williams Optic telescope's field of view. And in fact, its pixels are just 2.9 microns. So why didn't the makers of this camera sensor just make a huge sensor with bigger pixels, so that the pixels would be better at gathering light? This brings us into the very important topic of sampling. Every time you point your telescope at something, the pixels of the camera sensor sample a small part of that image. And it's important to get the right number of samples. Too many or too few samples makes a poor image. Think of every pixel on a camera sensor as capturing a little piece of the image, because that's literally what it does. Lots of little pixels capture more samples. It moves toward oversampled. If an image is highly oversampled, the smaller pixels cannot capture light as effectively, so the images will come out dimmer. And fine details of the DSO being shot can become softer due to the way light moves around on the telescope as a result of the way the atmosphere causes light to waver. But if the pixels are bigger, then you have fewer pixels, moving an image toward being undersampled. When a camera is undersampled, it means that the pixels are too large. And when the pixels are too large, a lot of light is captured, but images can look harsh and grainy because there is too much transition in brightness and not enough resolution. So, for a long time, astrophotographers sought to perfectly balance between oversampled and undersampled, aiming for pixels that were just the right size for a telescope at any given focal length or magnification. Calculators such as the CCD suitability calculator, found at astronomy.tools, were used to help with this. And for a long time, these tools were very useful. By combining the right telescopes with the right camera sensors, they allowed us to get the best images possible with the technology available at the time. But times change, and so does technology. And I've found in the last 10 years that oversampling has become more and more doable. Camera sensors have become much more sensitive to light, allowing smaller and smaller pixels to be used effectively, allowing for higher resolution within images. This shows up particularly when using non-generative AI-based software such as Astro's Blur Exterminator to execute deconvolution and sharpen an image. In fact, there's a great article on this at a website called Astroworld Creations, called How Bad is Oversampling, written by Willem Driffout. In the article, the author shot the Crescent Nebula in 2018 using technology from that era, and then again in 2024 using technology from that era. In 2018, he shot it properly sampled. In 2024, he shot it with a new camera with smaller pixel sizes that were oversampled, and he discovered that the oversampled results were much better, especially after executing deconvolution using the Blur Exterminator. The reason why is very similar to the reason that higher megapixel images show up more sharply on 4K monitors than lower megapixel images, even if those lower megapixel images were shot with 8.3 megapixel sensors, which, as we've discussed, actually matches the megapixels of a 4K monitor. And as we talked about a few minutes ago, the reason is because when those higher megapixel images are downsampled for presentation on a 4K monitor, an 8.3 megapixel monitor, the downsizing software has more samples to work with. Each pixel is a sample. So the pixel presented on the 4K monitor is the product of 2 or more pixels as measured from the sensor, allowing for more accurate estimation of what the downsampled pixel should look like, providing sharper images. And in a very similar way, oversampled astrophotography images provide more samples for software such as the Blur Exterminator to work with, providing for more detailed images, not just in terms of creating sharpness, but also in terms of portraying light values, what in ordinary photography might be considered light and shadow. So the dynamic range, the differences in brightness in oversampled images can also be presented in a more refined manner. This presents astrophotographers with a real conundrum when choosing sensors. Do we go for higher megapixel sensors in order to have more samples and produce better images, or do we go for lower megapixel sensors in order to have bigger pixels that can capture more light? As always, everything in photography is a compromise. The biggest pixels possible aren't actually the best answer. Because modern cameras are so light sensitive, they just don't have to be made that big. Which is fortunate because a camera sensor's pixel size does need to match, to a degree, the focal length of the telescope. Like the author of the article How Bad is Oversampling that I just mentioned, I've also found that these days it's better to be a bit oversampled, which means having a camera sensor with pixels a bit smaller than what's called for in CCD pixel calculators. My favorite pixel size calculator is that one at Astronomy Tools, so I'm going to use it as the reference going forward in this discussion. On the Astronomy Tools CCD suitability calculator, you can see at the very bottom there is a multicolored bar that shows the spectrum of pixel size suitability. As things move toward the purple on the left, they're oversampled, and as they move toward the red on the right, they're undersampled. And green could be interpreted as perfectly sampled, but honestly, I think the green is perfectly sampled in terms of the way camera technology was 5 to 10 years ago. These days, based on findings reported in articles such as How Bad is Oversampling, and on my own practical experience, I will always try to get a camera's pixel size to fall into the blue range of sampling. Allow me to show you a few examples of my own to give hard evidence as to why. Here are a couple properly sampled examples shot with my Williams Optics 81mm telescope, using the Player 1 Uranus-C, which falls exactly into the green or perfectly sampled zone of the CCD suitability calculator. And here are the same objects shot with the Celestron C8 and the Player 1 Ares M533, which falls into the blue, somewhat oversampled zone. While the oversampled images were shot on a higher focal length telescope, the oversampled images also have better light and shadow and relate more detail. Let's look again at the Astro Tool CCD suitability calculator. I have set the telescope, camera, and reducer to reflect my hardware. Now, notice the color spectrum at the bottom. See the black vertical line toward the left, just between the green and the blue? That indicates that I am typically shooting a little into the oversampled side. And to further demonstrate how well this works, here are some more results. All these images you will see I produced at the Sky Story Observatory using my own equipment at the settings you saw in the CCD suitability calculator. With typically okay seeing, though sometimes seeing might have drifted all the way up as far as exceptional, and on other occasions as far down as poor. Based on my photographic results, I think you'll get better images with cameras that have sensors with pixel sizes that push into the blue range of oversampled. But since appropriate pixel size depends on the focal length of your telescope, you'll have to enter your telescope and compare it to whatever camera you're using or considering buying to determine if it's somewhat oversampled. And if you're in the market to buy a new Astro camera, I think you'll be much better off if you focus your camera purchasing decision on, will that camera be somewhat oversampled given your telescope's focal length, than worrying about far less relevant issues such as how many megapixels a camera sensor has. Remember, no matter how many megapixels the camera sensor has, you will never see more than 8.3 megapixels because that's all a 4K monitor can portray. And that's also the resolution limit of the foveal area of your eyes, which is your center of vision. That's not to say additional megapixels don't have some use, but for astrophotographers, additional megapixels usage is more limited. The additional megapixels can be useful for downsampling, which can clean up noise in an image, but it comes at the cost of smaller pixels, which makes the sensor less efficient in gathering light. Diffout also noted, and I will concur, that you won't see a huge difference between properly sampled images and moderately oversampled images prior to deconvolution with a non-generative AI-based deblurring tool such as RC Astro's Blur Exterminator. He provided very compelling photographic evidence for this that you can see if you read the article at his website. Again, the link is in the video description. He speculated the initial photographic results looked similar because it was not until the AI-based deblurring tool could make use of all the additional information found in the oversampled images that the development quality could have a chance to stand out. And while I'm not a programmer or optical engineer, that makes sense to me. And what this means is that the real benefits of shooting somewhat oversampled, well, you might not see it much or even at all until you apply some sort of non-generative AI-based deblurring tool. But once you do, I think you'll find the difference to be striking, enough to convince you that you should be shooting moderately oversampled. So, whether you've been in the market for a new camera, or you were just wanting to learn more about how such concepts as megapixels, and in particular sampling, apply to astrophotography these days, I hope this video was able to deepen your understanding and meet your needs. As always, thanks for watching. I hope that you can take this information and use it to improve your astrophotography, create images that you're truly proud of, and above all, have fun getting out there and shooting the sky.